Welcome to the Penny for Your Thoughts podcast. This is your weekly insight into the small businesses of London. So we are doing a slightly different episode today. Rather than having a small business owner on, I have actually found us a couple of active angel investors to talk to instead, because I thought this might be helpful for you guys who are looking to raise your first round of investment over the next year or so. So today we're talking to Fergus and Ruari Bell, who run the Bell Partnership. So a bit of background on these guys. They were both in professional sports. They eventually moved off into real estate, had a couple of projects going in the north of England, exited from those, sold them off, etc. While this was happening, Ruari was also running a digital media agency here in London, which meant these guys had a lot of exposure to direct consumer brands, and essentially they just started seeding their angel rounds. And then from that, they have essentially just moved into larger and wider operations and are now investing in everything from direct to consumer consumer technologies to blockchain and Web3. And the list goes on. So without further ado, let's see what they had to say. So as active investors, you guys are looking all the time, I guess, at different businesses. What are three things that you guys are looking for in the founders of these businesses and the businesses themselves?
Yeah, a really good question. And so we focus on early stage businesses. So typically that would be a business probably in the first 6 to 12 months of its existence, where there may be an element of revenue there, or there may not. It might be pre-seed. So we would be involved in the first rounds of that business. So for us, backing the founders takes an outsized portion of our consideration, really, when we're looking at new business opportunities and new ideas. So with that in mind, I think for me, the first thing is passion. If you have built your business as a way to simply escape the 9 to 5 and effectively replace those 9 to 5 hours with I'm my own boss now, then there are positives and negatives to that. We would say that if a founder is passionate about their sector and their business, then they will extract far more value in those early stages because they will work above and beyond. And as every early stage founder knows, you aren't just the CEO or the managing director, you become the marketing director, the head of procurement, you become the social media manager. And so that passion for what you are doing and the realization or the thought that you're going to change something with the product that you're creating and or get to a position where the business becomes sizable and what you always wanted, that is goes a longer way than someone who might have just used the creation of a startup business to alleviate the pressures of a 9 to 5. So I would say passion, and as a direct result of that, the endeavour to work above and beyond in those early stages.
Yeah, for me, I'm more of a people's person. Fergus likes to focus on the data and the quantitative stuff. I like to try and get a grasp of who's behind the business, what the team's like, and what's their track record if they have any. So if they do have experience in the sector, it can be early stage, but they might have started with a few other businesses before. Then what have they done in the past? How well did it go? And it doesn't matter if they have had failures. I actually look for that quite a lot in founders. But it's how they've reacted to those failures, because it's a bumpy ride. It's not easy. People think being an entrepreneur is, you can have days off, you can do as you please, you can spend, 7 days a week on the beach with your laptop, but it's not easy at all. There's a lot that you have to learn. You have to learn fast. You got to deal with a lot of money very quickly and make sure you don't run out of the money. That's another really important thing. So it's about the track record for me and how I think they will cope with that in dealing with their team.
And then thirdly, it's a conversation that we often have in the office, which is about efficiency. So there is a lot of fluff at the start of an early stage business, which you can get dragged in the wrong direction, which might be focusing too much on the background color of a social media post. And so what I often speak to founders about and try and gauge throughout maybe a period of a month or two as we're kind of liaising with them about their round, their fundraising, is how efficient is that founder. And as a direct result, if you find a founder that will actively produce good quality work, will actively advance that business inch by inch forward on a regular basis, that stands the business in great stead. It also means that they will likely hire people in their image with shared sort of values, with shared levels of productivity. But that's something that gets overlooked. I think we're used to over complicating things when it's an early stage business. We're used to worrying about the microeconomic problems, whether it be ad spend, whether it be which influencer to use, and on occasion those things don't actually change the trajectory of the business. So I look for efficiency, I look for productivity, whether a founder follows up on calls and does what they say they're going to do, how they actually produce that piece of work or documentation, whether they are actually ticking things off a roadmap as opposed to just having it as a bright, shiny document for investors. And that's a real sign for things going forward. So yeah, I would say efficiency.
Okay, so let's talk a bit more about efficiency and how can you be more efficient?
A good question. I think largely it's an innate trait to the point where every founder, I think, understands and feels whether they are doing something which is actually moving that business forward. There is an educational element to it, and as per Rory's point about how people have responded to failures, I think failure usually comes because a business has lost momentum. There might be macroeconomic issues to do with supply chain or margins or just lack of sales, but it usually comes when a business stagnates, whether the staff and team become somewhat disjointed because they don't feel that they're getting to the sort of end goal as quickly as they could. So how to be more efficient? I think scheduling is really helpful. There are a load of great tools out there, but again, from scheduling to actual execution and completion, you must see that through. It mustn't be an afterthought. So ticking things off in those early stages of the business not only give you an element of sort of dopamine hit, but they motivate the team, whether it's the early founding team or new hires. They show that, wow, this business is moving in the right direction. So it's integral for a founder to lead the way in that. So scheduling, I'd say one. Secondly, I'd ensure that you have the relevant staff for the three core departments in your business. So if you're a direct-to-consumer commerce business, I'd ensure that your procurement and product team are as efficient as you are, and that you're in charge of them on a daily basis or a weekly basis. I'd ensure that you have a head of social media, because that and or marketing, that is your primary route to sales. And then I'd ensure that you have a head of operations, whether that's yourself, just someone who's managing the cumulative team. I would say splitting the business into departments early gives people a level of responsibility, and without you having to traverse across the multiple focuses and lose your focus about the direction. And again, just to summarize, I think that is probably where businesses stagnate, is they lose the directional focus and they focus on the absolute micro points as opposed to the full roadmap of where they're going. So
yeah, for me, as an individual personal point of view, there's so many different distractions that you have on a daily basis, whether that be your email, your WhatsApp, your Discord, people calling you the whole time. I think it's about working out how to stay as focused as possible without procrastinating and trying to work on something else because you're avoiding doing the initial task at hand. And as a founder, CEO of an early stage business, you've got to differentiate between what's fluff, what's doing a job for job's sake, and what's actually going to move the needle and going to make the company money. Because businesses are there to make money, and if you're not focusing on what's most important to creating revenue in that business, you can very easily get distracted with what's not pushing the business forward. So it's being able to separate those two things, staying focused, not being distracted, and then working as a team towards the goals that will make the company money.
And that's a very valid point, actually. The easiest exercise that we sometimes give founders is listing every job that they have got planned for a day or a week, and we'll say which one of these is directly making you money. And you'll find that maybe 60% of the jobs are business development tasks. Now, there is an argument that obviously that might pay off in the future, but if you're an early stage business that needs to get to the point of revenue and or sales to prove to investors, look, this product works and it's wanted, then you don't need that element of business development in that early stage. So just trimming the fat effectively and focusing on only tasks or the majority of tasks that directly result in sales or revenue is a really important lean operating model in those early stages.
Yeah, you want to get to a point whereby you've got that list so focused, and then you're trying to prioritize the things that will make you money first, but the whole list is all about generating the revenue, but that you can focus on, okay, that can come first before 1, 2, 3 and 4.
The changes in the global e-commerce market recently, is that looking like for you guys?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, there's obviously been quite a lot of disruption to the sector, increasing supply chain squeeze, and there's been higher transportation costs, which has obviously affected margins of sort of any direct consumer business at the moment. So what we're seeing are a lot of businesses effectively pivoting to manufacturing back in Europe or back in the UK where possible. It has ultimately hit a lot of early stage businesses quite hard in terms of their growth plans. That coincides with the changes to iOS 14, with the Facebook ads and the privacy settings of iOS 14. So the Facebook ads aren't so as effective as they were. So there is a general squeeze, I'd say, in the e-commerce market at the moment, and I think what our advice would be to founders on that point is that to ensure that their supply chain and their transportation is agreed in advance and or at a fixed rate, and if not, then do consider whether it's possible to change suppliers to an EU or UK based company.
Yeah, absolutely, as Fergus is saying there. There's been a massive squeeze on the prices of materials as well, following COVID and Brexit, a huge backlog which has thrown the prices through the roof, and then that in conjunction with the increasing rates for advertising, digital advertising and the return on investment being reduced massively, it's quite a tough time. So it's more about how you can acquire customers in different social medias and using different avenues to make the most of getting new customers and creating a community that can benefit to the whole brand as a whole.
I think as a general, just to take on that, as a general, looking at customer acquisition costs, what we've seen from the more innovative direct-to-consumer or FMCG brands is that they are going kind of back to guerrilla marketing, so brand activation events where there's this appetite for real-world meetups, connections, and we're seeing a lot more kind of street-based guerrilla marketing, which might be in terms of product sampling or in a localized area. That would be for the earliest stage businesses. On a larger scale, moving away from sort of a Facebook ad program or an Instagram ad program is difficult, and we've seen a lot of people migrate to TikTok. The ad platform's not quite as intuitive at the moment. So if I was to give some customer acquisition advice, I think instead of having all eggs in one basket, which previously was largely with the Facebook ads platform, I think you now need to take a blended approach across even accessing things like Web3 communities, Discord communities, certainly TikTok creators, although they are quite hit and miss. User-generated content on TikTok is certainly more valuable than Instagram at the moment, and taking a more back to basics approach. It's similar to what happened in 2008, 2009, where a lot of traditional businesses had to revert back to basics following the credit crunch, as it were. They didn't have the ad spend or marketing spend. So we're seeing that in a digital sense now, and I think that'll be around for the next 2 years at minimum.
Mm-hmm. Have you guys seen any sort of major trends in customer acquisition?
Yeah, I mean, in recent times, obviously, I'm sure many of the listeners are aware of the boom in whether it be Web3 or hyper-engaged micro-communities. I mean, we have a long thesis that obviously social media started as a huge horde of people, almost like a flock of sheep, and then over time, and since sort of 2008 onwards, it has disseminated into small focus groups of which people have shared interests. And it's in those focus groups where you're seeing the most engagement. And I think right at the cutting edge of that, with things like Web3, NFTs, all that really is a hyper-engaged community liaising on whether it be Discord or Twitter, and passionate about a central product. And so converting that to customer acquisition and marketing, if you can tap into that level of engagement and interest in a community, and if you can create that community yourself, even better. But even if you can tap in and kind of ride a wave there, we're kind of seeing a lot of bigger brands opt for smaller, hyper-engaged communities. So in terms of customer acquisition, I think embrace the trends of the day, which are clearly digital. As I said, a lot of Web3, a lot of sort of TikTok user-generated content, which has a very engaged audience as well. And you'll find that organic is now back to being the best, most efficient reach. It does take a lot of content, it does take a lot of planning, but if you had the content capability, then trial it out, I guess, and see how your content is being treated and reacted to in those communities.
Yeah, just to second that, really. There's a big pushback against the Facebooks, Instagrams, Googles that are targeting people, you know. Mm-hmm. You're seeing a lot of content you don't necessarily want to be seeing, and that's annoying people. So they're regressing back into these organic modes of community building through Discord and Twitter, and moving towards certain Web3 based decentralized forms of social media, where they can be the dictators of what direction they want to push businesses in, and how they can directly advise on the progress of that company, as opposed to just being hit by ads the whole time. And that's why it was a huge change when the iOS formation came into play and Facebook were hit. You know, their revenue's gone down. They're trying to get into Web3 themselves by increasing their meta responsibilities. But I don't think it's necessarily working for them, because you're finding these small pockets within pockets where people are talking to each other the whole time. The community is really strong, and they feel like they are advising on the progress of these new businesses and these protocols, as opposed to just being sold to the whole time and being the product of the bigger corporations.
Yeah, and also on that point, I think we can simplify it in giving your customers more of responsibility and engagement within your business is something we're seeing more and more of. So whether it be even simple polling about the direction of the business, whether that's through Twitter or Facebook or Instagram polls, attending or creating live events for the community to meet fellow buyers of your product or fellow users of your service, and then you create a human-to-human connection. And people are, I think post-COVID, it's accelerated this, but people are going back to those kind of early forms of traditional marketing, and certainly by giving a community a say over the direction of your early business, albeit it might not be a vital say, it creates that bond that they have had a say in the growth of the product, the growth of the business, and then, you know, they will largely spread that message via word of mouth.
So a lot of our listeners and a lot of our clients at Penny Books will be thinking about raising their first round of investment. Where do you add value as investors?
Yeah, really good question. In those early stages, I think it isn't, a lot of businesses accelerate into a fundraising round and just think that money or capital is just the be all and end all, and it simply isn't in that early round. There gets to a point where you need to grow in the Series A, Series B, Series C stages, where capital becomes ever more important so you can accelerate your growth. But in those early stages, I would look for an investor that wants to take an active role in the growth of the business, wants to introduce their contacts. They might have experience in, if you're a product-based business in a manufacturing sense, they might have relationships with existing manufacturers. They might have relationships or might have an investment in supply chain businesses that might help your own business. So I would look beyond capital. I know this is a very cliched point, but look at businesses look at investors that have built businesses and have an extensive contact book relevant to what you're doing. If that's in marketing, then that also goes a very long way as we come back to the customer acquisition. But yeah, I'd say add value through connections.
Yeah. For me, I think as an investor, we actively invest and we want to encourage them to grow as a business. It's best to question everything they do to make them think outside the box, right? It's not a nice task to have to do, but if you question everything, it starts to get them to think about, actually, I could improve this segment of the business by doing this. And then we can come and say, I actually agree with that, or I don't agree with that, and be as honest and upfront as possible so that it improves the efficiency and the revenue of the business. And as Fergus says, within business, people like to help out each other. Yeah. So when it comes to, you question it, there's a problem, okay, we know a guy who can fix this problem because we've worked with other people in the past and founders have come across this. And if they can help you with that problem, then it's only going to be better for everyone together.
Yeah, and I think you also want an investor to challenge the status quo to an extent. Again, to second Rory's point, if an investor looks at your revenue model and or your sales sort of model or platform and says, hey, I think you're doing it wrong, I think this is a B2B play instead of a B2C play, then they can add value that maybe the whole business would never have made it if you continued down that path. So there are so many relevant examples of that, but it tends to come from investors that have experience in your sector and certainly have collaborative relationships with other businesses that might be of benefit to you.
And is there anything that you find like constantly pops up? Are you always questioning the same thing, or does it differ business to business?
I think a lot of founders put a lot of onus on their cash flow projections. You see that constantly come up, and the topic about runway and how much runway shall we have? Should we have 6 months, 12 months? What's a good amount? And it's difficult to give a straight answer or sort of one size fits all answer to that. But that tends to be the area of least experience as to what money shall I keep in reserve for new hires, staff, how quickly shall I spend the round, because it never correlates with the projections that were put in the pitch deck. And so fiscal advice and even accounting advice to some extent is something that kind of gets overlooked during a fundraising round and actually is the basis of your ongoing business. So that would probably be the most common one that I get asked, but I operate in a slightly different role to Rory, who's on a more creative level.
Yeah, for me, I think it's trying to encourage them to be more, to add a perspective to their business. You get a lot of people that are so insular, they're constantly looking at the product that they're trying to sell. And most of the time they haven't actually gone to their target audience and said, what do you actually think of this product? Do you like it? If you don't like it, why not? So we can improve it. There's plenty of feedback that you can get, but at the start they're focused on got to get the sales in, got to get the advertising right, got to get the website right. All these small insular parts, and actually it's good for us to come in as investors, where let's bring some light onto actually, do you know that people like your product, or is it just you telling yourself that this is a very good product? You know, you've got to start asking people, because you can buy as many of them as you want, but your revenue's not going to go up. You've got to make sure that the people on the streets are going to be interested in it, and that comes down to quite a lot of guerrilla marketing, quite a lot of, you know, really rugged entrepreneurial active events and getting out there, showing people your product, speak to people, and that's the best way to get good feedback so you can improve on your business and your later products.
Okay, so let's round it off a little bit now. Let's talk about the worst investment you've made.
That's a good question.
The worst.
The one we want to forget.
The one we want to forget. Venture capital or early stage investing is probably, I'd say the success rate is probably 1 or 2 in 10 investments that really go on and make it. And obviously that's why the sector is so large, and because those 1 or 2 can do particularly well for an early stage investor. However, there are some you want to forget. We actually invested in a financial services product, and then we found out, or it transpired, that one of the team, the development team, was actually wanted and using a pseudonym for. He was using a pseudonym and was wanted for I think fraud in Canada.
For an exchange in Canada.
So that displaced everything. I think there was a lot of backlash, and again, when it came to things like KYC and anti-money laundering, somehow this developer had managed to make it on board in this team who were handling. So that was one to forget. And
how did you guys come off in that?
Well, as you can imagine,
you're not in trouble.
No. As you can imagine, there was a sort of crisis meeting amongst the early investors and the founder, and also, by all accounts, the founder, or as they said, had only found out in recent time too. Yeah. So, but it's very difficult to come back from stuff like that, and you've got to just take a view on it where you can't get too emotional, sentimental about that stuff. Again,
you live and learn, and if anything, it's made us think about certain aspects of looking at businesses a bit better. But it's quite hard when they're using a pseudonym and wanted for fraud. But it is what it is.
Yeah. Again, I mean, there are so many when I think back, which businesses that offer great promise, but maybe they don't fulfill that promise, and or some then pivot and go in a different direction and do very well. But we were involved in a social media business when Facebook was not nascent, but in its sort of mid-level stages in 2014, 2015, and they had a sort of roster of large social media accounts of which they were procuring advertising and then able to sell the advertising at scale to large advertisers. And a couple of their large Facebook accounts got hacked and immediately changed their name and lost them. So the whole basis of, they had a content creation and sort of media house, and the whole basis of their business was gone overnight. But again, those are operating risks that you put in the hands of a founder, and if that founder hasn't considered those risks, then it's one of those things that happens. But yeah, it's always funny looking back, and you just hope that you make more good choices than bad.
Yeah, and off the back of that last question, I promise, how do you guys deal with those kind of mistakes, or what's your outlook when things go wrong? What's your?
I think it's best not to dwell. Things do happen. There will be problems that do occur. It's, as I said earlier, it's more about how you can learn from it to make better decisions in the future, and then improve on year returns. At the end of the day, that's why we're in the business. It's to learn and to get better at what we're doing. So when things do go wrong, that's fine. If we can help to improve on the business internally, then it's great experience for us to take forward into bigger companies and bigger investments.
Yeah, and I'd also kind of segue into a closing comment for founders, is that things are going to go wrong, and things which you think are so destructive that you might not recover from will occur. You might lose key members of staff, you might have a huge cash flow hole in the business, but 80 to 90% of successful founders that you talk to or read about or listen on podcasts, they've also gone through that stage where they've had to almost pivot 180 degrees into a different product and or a different market. So Rory's advice there is pertinent in the sense that mistakes happen, and they happen for us as investors. We obviously try and take a view that you're backing the individual and that individual is robust enough to deal with the challenges of early stage businesses. But when they do happen, it's important to put them in context, and investors invest knowing the risk. You also don't want to go down the route of damaging your own health because of the pressures involved with demanding investors. I think that's another really important point. So yeah, to summarize, we take a relatively holistic view that our portfolio is hedged in different sectors, and whilst one sector might be struggling or going through a tough time because of macro climates or whatever it might be, then the other sectors are growing and doing well. So we can take a view that, you know, if a certain business doesn't work, then that's part of the job. That's the same for founders as well. And yeah, good luck to everyone out there.
Okay, well, thanks for joining us today, guys. I think everyone will find that really helpful.
Thank you.
No worries. Yeah, thanks.
Very much.
Appreciate it.
See you soon.
See you soon.